The next 3 years were tough on the citizens of Nottingham. The war had been drawn out longer than planned, and Prince John was getting too comfortable in his position of power. He had begun hoarding the wealth from the citizens with the help of the newly appointed sheriff. "This is becoming ridiculous," scoffs Ada in the washroom. "This is his second load of laundry I've washed from the prince's room. I mean, really, how many times does one man need to change clothes?" "He's hardly a man, if you ask me," says Moira. "The lady of the house doesn't even have that many garments." "He is quite dainty," chuckles Ada. Prince John was by no means manly. He was very conscientious of how people perceived him, often wearing several outfits a day, prancing around in flashy clothing and extravagant jewelry. There were rumors of his sexual orientation amongst the castle grounds, considering he was in his 30s and had yet to take a wife, or be soon seen with any female suitor. "How's the Queen, by the way?" asked Ada. The Queen had been sick for several months and wasn't showing any signs of getting better. "She's developed a bad cough. I'm worried it's from her being in bed all the time, looking out of her chamber window. She's worried about the king. It's been 3 months since any word has come back about the war." "Have you heard from Robin?" asked Ada. "No." "Have you written him at all?" she asked persistently. "I sent him 1 or 2, says Moira awkwardly. "I didn't know what to say." "I can't believe you two fall for each other right after he marches off into battle." "We didn't fall for each other. You did too. Don't think that I don't know why you keep that pressed rose in your satchel," quips Ada, with her hand on her hip, not falling for Moira's denial. Their conversation comes to a halt when the figure of the sheriff comes into the doorway. To be a trusted member of order in Nottingham, the sheriff's appearance screamed of evil and treachery. His shiny black hair flowed to his shoulders in a snake-like wave. His deep black eyes hid any sign of a soul he may have had, and his goatee reminded her very much of the Lucifer painting that hung in the church opposite the one of Christ. Even his clothing, although draped beneath his armor, was dark and menacing. "How are you ladies this joyous afternoon?" he greeted charismatically. "We are well, your good sir," says Ada, meekly. "Moira, is it?" he asked. "That it is." "Might I ask you to see to these?" he asked, placing several garments into her basket of laundry. "Yes, sir," she says as pleasantly as she can, feeling uneasy as his eyes lingered on her. He smiles seductively and walks off. "You ladies enjoy your day." "He gives me the willies," whispers Ada, as she takes her finished load back to the castle. Later that night, shortly into dinner, a messenger arrived with a message from the troops. Prince John reads it before instructing a servant to handle the matter accordingly. The lady of the house had fallen ill once more and remained in bed for dinner. She only took a few bites off the plate Moira brought her. It was heartbreaking to see the woman in the condition she was in. Moira held a spoonful of soup to the fragile queen's lips as she sipped. "It's good to see you eating something," she tells her. "I've lost my appetite for a lot of things. I can stand to eat better when I'm not in the company of that buffoon," scoffs the queen, referring to the prince. She catches Moira laughing, and it reminds her of the little girl she rescued from the streets. The queen was by all means a woman of the people. She oftentimes walked the marketplace just outside of the castle walls and spoke with the citizens, partaking in sincere conversations and sampling goods. Moira had crossed her path while walking and bumped into a guard. "Watch it, will ya?" she said as she continued on her way. The look on the guard's face as the spunky little girl passed made the queen laugh. She watched as Moira approached a group of 4 boys much older than her. "Hand it over," she yells. "Hand what over?" says the oldest of the group, standing to his feet. "Tag along and bug someone else," he says, shoving her shoulder. Moira stumbles back and looks at the boys with arms crossed. "Hand over the doll, or else," she demands. "Or else what?" he laughs. The queen continues to watch the interaction between the children as she browses the local goods. Moira walks away and returns seconds later with a broom. The group of boys laugh. "Watch out, she's got a broom," jokes one of the boys. Moira brings the broom handle across the face of the older boy, who falls to the ground as the others look in shock. She quickly starts swinging and thrusting the broom handle like a sword at the other boys. "Gimme the doll," she yells, and one of the boys tosses a ragged doll with a dirty blue dress and missing eye onto the ground by her feet. "Let that be a lesson to you." The queen signals one of her guards to break up the altercation. "My child," says the queen, walking over. "Does that doll really mean that much to you? That you would risk harm for it?" "My lady," says Moira, bowing to the queen, "this doll means nothing to me, but a great deal to my friend. And believe you me, those tossers had it coming." The queen tries not to laugh at Moira's inappropriate behavior, but is highly entertained by the spunky little girl. The queen signals her guards. "Feed her, clothe her, and bring her to the castle." "And what of my friend?" asks Moira. "Have her come too," acknowledges the queen. When the guards brought Moira and Ada, full and freshly dressed, into the queen's quarters, they were in awe. "My dear, do you know why I brought you here?" she asked Moira. Moira shook her head. "I like you," she says with a smile. "You have a free spirit, much like I envision my children would have. But it pains me to say that I cannot bear any." She looks over Moira. "How would you like to live here, in the castle?" she asks. Moira looks around for a moment. "What's in it for you?" The queen laughs. "You would be my new helper. Most little girls would jump at the opportunity to live in a castle, and you would get 3 meals a day." Moira looks at the queen curiously for a moment as she thought over the offer. "Deal. But only if Ada can stay as well. I wouldn't dream of separating you two." After dinner, Moira returns the dishes from the queen's chambers to the kitchen. The sound of bells and trumpets begin to ring down from the castle towers. "What is that?" asks Ada. "The king. He's dead," Moira explains as she places the queen's uneaten food on the counter. I must see to my lady." She steps off quickly up the stairwell and down the hall to the queen's quarters. She hears screaming and yelling as several chambermaids hurry out of her room. "Say it isn't so," she pleads to Moira as she walks into the room. "Say it isn't so." Moira sits beside the queen and hugs her tightly. The sickly woman wails in heartache. "Fetch a doctor," orders Moira to one of the maids by the door. "Get me a glass of wine and a cool compress," she orders another. "You must remain strong, my lady." She takes her hand. "Your people will need you." A maid quickly returns with the wine and compress. The queen takes a sip as Moira dabs the cool cloth on her head. The doctor comes in moments later, bringing with him some laudanum to help her sleep. Once she dozes off, Moira heads out to the washroom to retrieve the sheriff's garments. She brings them to his quarters, where he answers her knock, scantily clad. Moira turns her head from him, appalled by his appearance. "Your items, sir," she says, holding them out to him. My, what good work you do. You can place them on the bed, just over there." Moira warily walks into the room, avoiding any view of the sheriff's appearance. "You are a beautiful woman, Moira," he states. "Unwed, I see." Taking her hand into his, she casually pulls it away. I'm sure a woman like you is not short on admirers. Maybe you're just looking for a man of stature, a man of wealth and power, someone who knows how to thrill a woman, he says while circling her like a vulture eyeing a fresh carcass. I'm afraid I haven't the time for a husband. I'm dedicated to my lady, she explains. Well, I'm sure in her recent state you will have more time to seek one soon. Is there anything else I can assist you with, Sheriff? Or am I free to go? Her voice becoming more aggressive. That is all for now, he says, running his hand down her arms. She cringes at his touch and turns to leave. Prince John wasted no time making arrangements for his crowning ceremony. He was pronounced as King of Nottingham in the courtyard just after daybreak. Moira and Ada watched from one of the chamber windows as he gave a speech to the impoverished citizens he now ruled over. Bollocks! He's the reason they're all starving and hungry. People are working their asses off providing for their families, and he takes everything they leave and starves them, huffs Moira. Things'll get better, Ada says naively, trying to stay positive. When? When the resistance decides to come marching into the castle and be slaughtered by all the guards? Will left 6 months ago to join them, and we haven't seen or heard from him since. He's probably dead in a ditch somewhere. Must you be so negative? Ada turns to leave. She understood Moira's frustration, but she didn't want to hear talk about Will like that. His father had to give up his property to the sheriff when he came up short on their taxes. Work at the mill had become slow, and the pay was not what it was before the war. Many of the neighboring towns refused to trade with Prince John due to his high cost and tax rates on goods. It wasn't just the citizens who were suffering, it was the businesses too. Will left to find the resistance in hopes of bringing help back to the people, but no one had heard from him since he had gone. That evening, the newly crowned King John calls all servants to the common area. As ruler of these lands and master of this domain, I'm afraid I will be needing to make a few changes. He walks through the gathering of servants and taps several on the shoulders. You. When he is done, he returns to his post. If I have placed my hand on you, you may see your way to the door. Your services are no longer needed. Moira looks at Ada, who has just been dismissed. She hangs her head sorrowfully. Moira takes her hand and walks over to the king. Your Highness, please, I ask you to reconsider dismissing her. She has nowhere to go, and she has worked for your Highness's family since she was a child, pleads Moira. I'm sorry, but there's just no more need for any more chambermaids. You, my dear, are highly favored by the Queen, and therefore will remain. I'm afraid if my friend must go, milady will have to do without me, Moira says, standing her ground. You would turn your back on the Queen? Drop your post. The Queen knows my character. She's the closest thing I've had to a mother, and would not question my judgment, Your Highness. Now, wait just a moment, interjects the sheriff. The Queen, in her current state, could use an extra maid by her side. Surely we could keep Miss, Ada, responds Moira. Ada, just until the Queen has recovered, suggests the sheriff. Very well, agrees King John, as he turns to head to his chamber. The sheriff smiles at Moira before leaving with him. Moira, you didn't have to do that, Ada says, hugging her. You'd never make it out there. Better to be in here with me and these twits. A few days later, while walking through the kitchen with a fresh harvest of eggs, Moira is confronted by the sheriff. Good day to you, he says, bowing his head. Good day, Sheriff. Please, call me William, he says, walking over to her. I don't know how appropriate that would be, sir, she says, getting uncomfortable as he approaches. I insist, he says. I was thinking of touring the castle gardens this afternoon and hoped you would accompany me. I'm afraid I must refuse the offer. I have quite the workload this evening, and I don't want to get behind. I'm sure a little fresh air would ease the stress of your labor, he urges, while running his hand across the tops of her shoulder. I must say, Sheriff, this is highly inappropriate. Your little friend would be out in the streets begging for scraps and spare change if I hadn't spoken to the king. His tone turns menacing as his hands grip her shoulders. I would think you would be more grateful. He turns her towards him, and he pushes his weight against her, wedging her between himself and the counter. He sniffs the side of her neck fancifully. They've returned, yells Ada, running into the kitchen. Robin and the men have returned from battle. The sheriff steps away from Moira and walks out the back door towards the stables. Moira bows her head in shame and frustration. He could have had his way with her right then before Ada had interrupted, and there wouldn't have been anything she could do. Fighting back would have ended up with her and Ada either locked away for good or in the stocks. She takes a deep breath and dusts off her dress. Let's go greet them, she says, grabbing Ada's hand and walking to the courtyard.